better idea of what it's going to be like inside the courtroom during the sentencing phase of Markeith Loyd's trial today. We've got our legal analyst, Whitney Boan, here to talk about it. Whitney, this jury convicted him in 4.5 hours. Does that give us any indication of whether or not they're leaning one way or the other?
No, I don't think it does, actually. I mean, it's a totally different stage of the trial, obviously, whether or not they believe that he committed premeditated first-degree murder versus whether or not they think the punishment should be life or death. And so because of that, I wouldn't necessarily find that, even if they thought the guilt of Markeith Loyd was overwhelming, that necessarily means that they're inclined, especially without a presentation of the mitigating or aggravating factors that both sides are going to present in this penalty phase. It doesn't mean that then they're going to rush to give him the death penalty just because they found him guilty of the crime he was charged with.
Is that what it is that they look into? And that's the line right there. If it's premeditated, you lean towards death, and if not, if it's a reaction to something, or if they seem to think that he had a troubled childhood or something, all those things play into it, and they go, okay, life in prison.
Well, premeditation even isn't necessarily an automatic death penalty sentence. I mean, if a murder is not premeditated, a lot of times it's not even first degree. Obviously, it's going to be something like second degree or something like that. But the premeditation is not the pivotal factor. It's whether or not there's aggravating circumstances, such as the crime was committed in a particularly heinous or cruel way. So your question has the right spirit in terms of, you know, if the jury finds that, well, this wasn't particularly atrocious or cruel, it was more of something that happened in a somewhat premeditated manner, obviously because they believed he committed it in a premeditated manner to find him guilty of first-degree murder, but that it wasn't so cruel to shoot someone versus, you know, to torture them for long periods of time, then maybe they won't give him the death penalty. But
what about the fact that she was pregnant at the time?
That may count as something that would go towards an aggravating factor, and I'm sure that the prosecution is going to tend to argue that.
Okay. Let me ask you this, because this is a little unusual, because this jury knows that next year he's facing another murder trial, one that could carry a conviction, one that could get him the death penalty. People are still human beings. If they have any sort of hesitancy to convict him of death or sentence him to death, would they be reticent to do it here and just sort of punt that down to the next jury and let them decide?
I really can't think of a harder position than being a juror in this situation. You know, having to make a decision about whether or not somebody lives, even if you think they've done the most horrible thing in the world, is a very, very heavy decision. And so, Bob, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, they are human beings. Right. They're charged with the law and to follow the law, and I'm sure that they will. But at the same time, they're human beings, and so I think it's very difficult to get a unanimous death penalty verdict from 12 people, anyways, just because people vary, and again, they're going to have very human considerations about whether or not they feel comfortable being the one to decide if somebody gets the death penalty.
Last question, just got a few seconds left. How long do you think this is going to last, and do you think Markeith Loyd gets back up and testifies?
I think it'll last probably about a week, and it may be a little less, but I'm not sure if he's going to testify or not. He certainly has the right to if he wants to.
Okay, Whitney Boan, we always appreciate you coming in early on a Monday morning.
Thanks for having me.
She's the best. Thanks, Whitney.